the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes from our meeting of February 25, 2020.
So moved.
Second?
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Normally, we would move straight to hearing of visitors. I do want to take just a minute to read from a statement that the mayor's office issued earlier today for really the interest of clarifying what's out there with regard to COVID-19. And reading from the statement now, at a planning and preparedness meeting held on Tuesday, March 10, 2020, representatives from Northern Berkshire EMS reported that in order to ensure the safety of the local emergency response workforce, EMS personnel and other first responders will follow an updated set of dispatch and patient contact protocols. This means that the way patients and caregivers interact with EMS staff may look different, but will not cause delays in emergency response or the quality of care received from EMS. In addition, Governor Charlie Baker declared a state of emergency in Massachusetts on Tuesday, March 10, 2020, to provide greater flexibility to respond to this outbreak. And the more pertinent points. Locally, at the direction of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, North Adams City Councilor Jason LaForest entered quarantine on Tuesday, today, after being tested for exposure to the COVID-19 coronavirus after developing mild symptoms this morning. Following consultation with MDPH and the City Health Department staff, North Adams Mayor Tom Bernard, who attended weekend social functions with Councilor LaForest, voluntarily elected to work from home pending the results of Councilor LaForest's test. So let's just be clear. Councilor LaForest has been tested. The test results have not come back. He has not, as has been reported in at least one media outlet, been tested positive. These are really on the in the way of an overabundance of caution that these actions have been taken. So just to be clear, any questions? Thank you. Hearing of visitors. Anyone like to address the council on an agenda item before us tonight? Mr. Sapienza.
Thank you, Brian Sapienza, 113 Pleasant Street. This is in regards to item number 11,770-5 on the $65,000 to the water plant upgrades. I read the breakdown of the different components that are going to be used on this, and I found that some of them seem to be awfully high priced. Things like pipe caps and stuff that were priced at $150 a piece. I'm not opposing this. I'm just curious why, if anybody can answer, why certain items just seem to be priced way over the what seems to be a reasonable market price for these individual parts and pieces. And this is unrelated, but I did see a Facebook post earlier tonight stating that Mr. Councilor LaForest was negative. I don't know if anybody else has seen that. So I just wanted to pass that along.
Can't fill in for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to address the council on a meeting agenda item? Mr. Smith.
Robert Smith, 140 Pleasant Street. In regards to the same thing Mr. Sapienza just spoke on, I'm thinking if the mayor needs to shift money from one area to another regarding the watershed, that it has to be very important. And so with that in mind, water is essential for everybody. So I would probably go in favor of him being able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, thank you. You've no doubt noticed that Mr. Lescarbo from the Department of Public Works is here with us tonight. Without objection, I'd like to move first to paper 11,770-5, the communication requesting the transfer of $65,000 for water plant upgrades. Hearing no objection. Mr. Lescarbo, if you would, but first, We have a mayor's communication, number 16, regarding the transfer of $65,000 from the stabilization account for water plant upgrades. Without objection, we'll file the communication. And move to the order, 11,770-5, an order authorizing the mayor to transfer the amount of $65,000 from the stabilization account to public services, water department, repairs and maintenance. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Before we get to discussion, Mr. LaScarbo, would you like to outline for us
Sure.
what this is all about?
Sure,
Thank you.
Counselors. The appropriation is to upgrade the propane piping at the treatment plant. Everybody who's been up by there has seen the big tank that's outside, 10,000-gallon propane tank. And because of the size of that tank, our piping is out of compliance. We have to get up to the National Fire Codes. So we've been under an order from the state fire marshal to get this done.
Okay.
So that's what the appropriation is for. As far as the caps, if that was what the engineer specified, that's what, it was the lowest bid. We took the lowest bid.
All right, very good.
I don't have an answer specifically for these pipe caps. but-
Okay, thanks. Discussion? Counselor Blackmer?
Yeah, since there were questions about, and I don't know if you want to go over the RFP process or you want me to give a quick synopsis.
You can.
Basically, we had the bids from the engineer, the professionals. They prepare the bid documents. We then, because this is more than $50,000, have to go out through the central register and advertise in the paper. So we then get bids in and we take the lowest bid unless there is a reason not to, which wouldn't be the case of some bidder having a really bad record or something like that, or they missed a key part of the bid. So this is the bid that came in, the lowest bid. This is what they decided to go with, and thank you for providing all this for us. I'm not sure it was necessary, but thank you, and I think it's pretty straightforward what the cost is, and that procurement procedures were followed, and I think we should just move on with it.
Thank you. Counselor Harpen?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, this seems to be a bid from a local supplier, propane piping company that's been around for quite some time in Berkshire County. So I feel comfortable with that. My only question is, I would like to have a tour of the facility, and I was wondering if at some point, I don't know if other counselors are interested or not, but that's one building that I haven't seen yet, so it would be nice to maybe schedule something.
Several counselors in here have been on the tour, so I'd be more than happy to take
Okay.
anytime.
All right, great, thank you. Counselor Wilkinson?
Yep, I would very much like to take that tour. The last time it was offered, I wasn't able to go. We got a $10 million water treatment plant. $65,000 sounds like a lot of money, but every once in a while, you got to do some maintenance. So I think it's a no-brainer.
All right, thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. It's a roll call vote.
Blackmer,
Yes.
Bona,
Yes.
Harpen,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Moulton,
Yes.
Wilkinson,
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. LaScarbo, thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor.
Have a good night. Moving back to the top of our agenda, paper 11,811, communication from Councilor LaForest requesting a process for appealing to the city solicitor, referred to General Government Committee, and last postponed to our meeting of tonight. Councilor Blackmer, if you would update us.
So, let's find those notes. We met on the 10th of February, I think it was, and we met on several things. This is the one item that's due back today. Yes, we met on 2/10/2020 at the Chambers to discuss Council Paper 11,811. And it was a communication regarding the process to access the city solicitor. Councilors Wilkinson, Sweeney, and Blackmer were there, and the members, and Councilors Harpen and Hopkins also attended. The discussion centered around the fact that the option to contact city solicitor is in the ordinance that was stated several times, and it was also stated that we needed a process, and that we moved to send it back to city council. Upon further research, I actually looked, I did not have the ordinance with me at the meeting, my bad, I guess I should have asked somebody what ordinance they were referring to. And I will read the ordinance. The city solicitor shall, whenever so required by the mayor, the city councilor, or any officer of the city government who may need the same in the discharge of official duties, furnish them or any of them with his legal opinion upon any subject touching the duties of their respective offices. Whenever the opinion is required to be in writing, the question submitted for this consideration shall be stated in writing. I just want to talk a little bit about past practice. In the 10 years I was on the council under both the Barrett and Alcombright administrations, if the council had a question, we voted as a council to send it to the city solicitor. The city clerk would then forward it to the city solicitor and get an answer back. Sometimes quickly, sometimes not so quickly, it depended. I think that policy makes a lot of sense. And also, it says the city council, not the city councilors. And I think that we act as a body, not as individuals in this regard. And so that's the other reason I think we should just continue with that process. Also, it doesn't talk about, it says who may need, who decides who may need it. It doesn't say unfettered. It doesn't say unlimited. So I think that my personal, and this was not the committee because this was not information I had at the committee, my personal recommendation is that we go back to what we were doing as far as if we want to refer something to the city solicitor, we vote on it as a council, and we have a majority. If we have a majority voting yes, then we send it to the clerk to send it to the solicitor. And I would also recommend that we do that after we've exercised as many options of free information available to us.
All right. Ideally, I'd like a motion on the floor. Thank you for the update. Ideally, I'd like a motion on the floor to continue the discussion. So you are essentially saying to stay with past practice.
I move that we stay with past practice on how we contact the city solicitor.
Okay. Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay. Discussion. Councilor Hartman.
Yeah, I don't know what the past, it sounds like that whatever the past practice was, it sounds like it's a pretty good practice to me. However, was it something that was written, or was this an unwritten rule?
It was an unwritten rule.
Okay,
We didn't have a specific process,
Okay.
at least to my knowledge, but that is what was done.
So if we are gonna do based on what the past practice was, it's really just referring back to the ordinance. So basically, the way I'm reading the ordinance, and I'm gonna read it, and maybe I'm interpreting it different than you are, but it says, the city council or any officer of the city government who may need the same in the discharge of official duty, furnish them, or any of them, which means any one of us, with his legal opinion. So the way I'm interpreting it is, yes, we can do it either as a group or we can do it individually, as the ordinance is written.
Councilor Moulton.
Yeah, no, that's why I interpret it also. Any individual counselor could bring it to the city solicitor. I know I have done it years ago with Mr. DeRosa, sought a legal opinion, but it didn't have to go through the council.
Councilor Bona.
I think past practice was both ways. There was clearly times we would let's say, vote on accepting an ordinance, but often we would refer it to the solicitor for final approval to make sure it was written correctly. There was many times the council as a whole did refer things to the solicitor to get answers on questions. But I also remember there were several times I did email the solicitor directly, and usually it was a simple yes or no. Should this be in council? Should this go somewhere else? And I think there was also a number of times that the city clerk sometimes needs to refer to the solicitor to make sure something, is being done the correct way. So I don't know if there was a right or wrong. And I'm not sure. I think the only, unless we're going forward and we find out there's, one or two counselors that are. The difference is now is that every time we use a solicitor, we get charged,
Right.
and that's a difference, and it's not a change I like, but it is what we currently have, and so we still don't know to this day what a yes or no answer to a question cost us. We don't know is there a minimum for every question we forward to the solicitor? So that's hard for us when we look at our budget to say, what exactly are we getting for that? But I do feel, unless all of a sudden we saw there was a counselor or two that, for whatever reason, was, charging up $5,000 in questions, I don't know if there's a concern at this point. I'm not sure.
Let me recount, and we'll go to discussion. Let me recount as I recall all of this happening. This originated when there was some dissatisfaction within this body that we were having to check with the administration rather than getting a legal opinion, which had been the case when the city had an in-town attorney handling questions. Once we started using KP Law, there was a different process, and again, there was dissatisfaction within this body as to how those things were being handled, whether they were the questions that we had about the law were actually getting answered by a lawyer. Thus, the process where we put together a draft form indicating here are some guidelines, do these things first, and then the question became, and I think it's coming to a head here, is there sign-off? Does the council president sign off? Does a committee chair sign off? Are there two people signing off? Or can an individual counselor, without consulting anyone else, tap into the one line item that we have for getting legal opinions? My position all along has been that I don't think any one single counselor should be able to privately and anonymously tap into that source of public money. And I'm going to continue to say that. Councilor Lamb.
Thank you. Just a couple of things, and I'm actually against us voting on this tonight in this respect. I actually think it should go back to committee, specifically because of the question of we don't know if there is a minimum cost associated with a single question. There might be a minimum time requirement, which is standard practice in the legal profession, where it's a minimum of 15 minutes or it's a minimum of half an hour, and that adds up fairly quickly, potentially. So I think that that's an important variable for us to have in mind before we make any decision. I would also say that there's two ends of the spectrum, right? There's zero checks and balances, and then there's overwhelming checks and balances. I think that we ran into a point of contention where it felt like there was an overwhelming checks and balances piece initially, which brought this to a head. But I also don't think that a free-for-all is an appropriate mechanism to approach this either, because it is a spend down of the public dollar, right? So this is $5,000 of the public's money that is being utilized. I don't think I have the right to take that and say, I'm going to spend it on XYZ thing without at least some sense from this body. I don't think it should go to another body to get approval for that. So that's just a concern I have there. So I'm wondering if the past practice, which was an unwritten rule, having that become a written rule of voting to refer to the solicitor might be a mechanism specifically because of the change of model. Again, going back to past, for years and years and years, the model was we paid a flat rate for our retainer on legal counsel, and now it's by the minute or by the half hour or whatever the case might be. So I think that because of a change in the actual financial model for legal counsel for the city, it requires a change in process, or at least a documented process for how we are going to move forward with this. So I don't like invisible rules, I think is what it comes down to.
I agree. Councilor
And I
Blackmer.
agree with Councilor Lamb, and I also want to stress that I think the conversations with the former attorney were much more thought of as informal. A lot of us in the community had a relationship with him, from one organization or another, and I don't think it was, now Councilor Bona said he just shoot him off an email. I don't think most counselors actually did that. I don't think that might have been that relationship and that modus operandi. But I do think that, like Councilor Lamb said, that we have X amount of dollars, we're spending our dollars. My experience with KP Law is they bill in tenths of an hour, which is 6-minute increments. We might have a different negotiated, we'd have to ask. And I do think that it shouldn't just be any one of us saying, oh, I want to call the lawyer. I really think it should go through the council, that a majority of us, there's 9 of us, that's 5, it's not a super majority. We should vote if we're going to do it.
Councilor Bona?
I don't see issues coming up, but my argument to that would be, let's just say there's 2 counselors that feel strong that they want a legal opinion on something, and 7 don't, then they're denied getting a legal opinion. What if it's even about how the council operates? I'm just saying, that could happen if you put it to the council vote. So,
Counselor, who had their hand up next?
I think Council
Wilkinson.
Ladies first.
Counselor Wilkinson.
I like the concept of having the council be able to make that decision. I mean, I used to call the city solicitor up just directly, and sometimes they'd take the call, sometimes they wouldn't, but always got an answer. But the model has changed, and as we're building on the 16th of a minute or whatever it is, we have a finite amount of money that we can spend. I think that if there's 2 counselors that are really feeling that they need to get a legal opinion and the rest of the council doesn't, then I guess they haven't really made a strong enough case.
Thank you. Counselor Harpen?
I would just like to add, if you're going to change this, I think it needs to be an actual ordinance change, more than just a rules change.
Well, and I think there was some discussion of that at your last meeting, but it sounds like we might be sending
There
it back
was,
to
we
you.
might actually need to get a legal opinion on that.
The irony.
The irony of getting a legal opinion on the
Okay.
legal opinion.
Are you open to taking this back
I
to
will
your
take
committee?
it back and we can
Okay.
refer it back to general
If you'd
government.
rescind your motion then?
I rescind my motion.
We have a motion to refer back to
I
general government.
make a motion to refer this back to general
Is there a
government.
second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Counselor Bona?
yeah, keep in mind, based off of where Councilor Blackmore was going with this, so it may go general government, and then if it does come back to council, at some point, we may be referring it to the solicitor to
That's true.
confirm
Yes, I know that.
that. So it'll be a while before this is done, so.
That's fine.
Okay.
The wheels of democracy.
It's sausage making.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, and a date that you'd like to bring this back? I would give it at least
At least
2
a
more
month.
meetings, if not
Yeah,
3
at
more
least
meetings.
Second meeting, I guess the second meeting in April, which I did
Second
not.
meeting in April.
Usually I'm really good with that. I didn't come
Okay.
prepared.
We have a motion and a second
Well, that's
to,
we got to do
we need an amendment to
amendment,
your motion.
second on the
Sorry.
amendment, second on the amendment.
Okay, we have a motion to amend the original motion to bring this back on the second meeting in April, and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And now the original motion, which is to send this back to general government to come back to us on the second meeting in April. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Counselor Blackmer, for taking this on. Order 11,849, an order authorizing the mayor in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30B, Section 16, to declare property located at American Legion Drive, map number 151, lot 62, available for disposition. Last in City Council, February 25th.
Move to
Correct.
postpone.
And, correct, okay. We have a motion to postpone. Any second on that?
I'm not sure if I need to recuse myself if we're just postponing it and leave the room, or if that's going to be a quick conversation. So I'm going to leave the room.
Ask you to leave the room.
Just someone come get me this time.
Okay. Yeah, somebody remind me on that.
What, you didn't get the message?
Move to postpone, and I guess I'll say the reason I'm postponing. One, the mayor's not here, and the Counselor LaForest isn't here, and as it is to vote on this, we're already down 2 counselors, so it would be, I would like to hopefully have a full council and the mayor here.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion.
Yeah, just to be
Counselor
clear, I did file, what did I file? I gave you the paper. What was it called?
Notice of,
Recusal?
Thank you. So I can vote on this, so
You can or you can't?
I can. I can vote on this.
Okay, that's
Can.
what I thought, yeah.
you are able to vote.
I
on
am
it.
able to
Correct,
vote on
okay.
this.
Okay, great, thank you. Further discussion, Counselor Harpen.
Can you please explain why this is back on the agenda and we're voting on this
I
again?
can,
Okay,
because
thank
at
you.
our last meeting, the vote was to refer it to committee, and the vote failed, and we moved on. And we did not actually conclude the business on this order.
Did not get killed, so it's
So-
still there hanging in limbo.
So it was not resolved fully.
It didn't get voted to file or anything.
Right.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second to postpone to our next meeting, which would be the first meeting in no, second meeting in March,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
assuming that we have a full boat then,
The 24th.
the 24th of March. Discussion, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous, thank you. Would someone let
Let Mr.
Counselor
Lamb
Lamb
know.
know?
I'll do the honors.
Motion to adjourn.
Just for your information, we voted to postpone to our next meeting, in the second meeting in March. Communication 11,852, communication from Councilors Lamb, Blackmer, and Sweeney regarding establishing a working group to improve the lives of members of the community. It was voted to refer to the chair and postpone to tonight's meeting. I'd like to ask for a postponement to our next meeting as well. We are still talking with a couple of people who are candidates for serving on this
So
working
moved.
group.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second to postpone to the meeting of March 24th. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Paper 11,000, we already did that. 861, communication submitted by Counselor Lamb regarding a
Wait.
proposed.
Point
I'm
of
sorry?
order? We
Yes.
still have to vote on it. We just got the presentation. We didn't actually vote on the order.
We did vote on the order. It was a roll call vote on the $65,000.
We did? Oh, my
Yes.
God, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I understand completely.
Tuesday.
Council Paper 11,861, communication submitted by Councilor Lamb regarding a proposed city ordinance of public establishments serving food to provide a designated diaper changing area. Councilor Lamb, do you want to
Yeah,
read the
so-
communication and then we'll act on it?
Sure, I can read the communication and then we'll move to the order itself. Dear fellow counselors, parenthood and the caretaking of children is an incredibly rewarding, life-changing experience, as many of us know. Children bring joy to our lives, but also present challenges that come with caring for them. The changing of soiled diapers is one example of these challenges in caretaking, especially when trying to do so in public venues. As a parent myself and as someone who wants to have more people choosing to come to North Adams to start and raise families, I am asking this council to please take action in adopting local ordinance to increase the accessibility of all gender-accessible diaper changing tables in the city. This public health and safety issue remains under-acknowledged in existing legislation and ordinance in Massachusetts. I've observed too many unsafe situations where caretakers, including myself, at family-friendly venues and events have been forced to change young children in unsafe ways. I've witnessed parents balancing children on their laps or on precarious countertops, or worse, placing children on germ-laden bathroom floors in order to change soiled diapers. This is an issue that must be handled, especially as we see more aggressive viruses and resistant bacterial strains coming into contact with people. Even without any new novel viruses, fecal coliform is everywhere on public bathroom floors, and injury from falling off of a lap or a sink basin onto a hard tile floor is a serious risk. As it currently stands, common practice tends towards only installing changing tables in women's restrooms, if at all, which relegates the core caretaking duty of diaper changing to female-identifying individuals only. It is unfair to place 100% of this responsibility on female caretakers, and this imbalance keeps male-identifying caretakers from contributing equitably by preventing them from playing an important role in the caregiving process. Furthermore, in cases of male partners and single male caretakers, this becomes an even larger issue, as it is a real possibility that there will be no available changing tables for their use. We can and need to do better to support safe caretaking of children in the city of North Adams. One option within our power is to pursue adoption of ordinance that builds in the best practice of including universally accessible changing tables in businesses and locations frequented by families with children. With that, I am hereby requesting that the City Council please pursue adoption of the included legislation into city ordinance. This legislation is drawn directly from two bills currently under consideration in the Massachusetts Senate. These bills both have favorable opinions with their most recent review committees, but they still have an undetermined timeline for potential adoption. After discussing with several state senators involved, rather than wait for a process that we cannot control at the state level, I hope that this council can act in a proactive manner to bring this language into our own city ordinance so it is codified and implemented in a way that will help us become increasingly family-friendly as a city. I included the language, which will be in the order itself, so we'll get to that in a minute. Thank you for your help in addressing this matter. I look forward to pursuing a model that makes living and visiting in North Adams even safer and more attractive for families with young children going forward.
All right, Thank you, and without objection, we'll file the communication and move to the ordinance, paper 11,861. Ordinance amending Chapter 3 of the revised ordinances of the City of North Adams to add Section 50 titled Requirements for Public Amenities, subsections 50.1 and 50.2. Do we have a motion to pass to a second reading and publish as required by law?
I'd actually move to refer to
You want to go
community
to committee
development.
first? Okay, very good then. Please make
You
that
can move
motion.
it?
Yep,
Okay.
Is that a motion?
that's a motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second discussion. Counselor Wilkinson.
Has April Fool's come early? This is probably one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard of. I understand this is very self-serving for Counselor Lamb, but you're going to ask restaurant owners to pay all this money out to put this out there. They're already just getting by to begin with. What if they don't have the physical facility to be able to install something like this? You're just going to put it on a wall someplace? Or some of these restaurants have very small bathrooms. You're lucky to get yourself in there. Now you're going to put a changing table there? I understand why you're doing this, but this is where government gets too much. We don't need this.
Thank you. Counselor Moulton.
Yeah, again, I was, kind of surprised. I never saw anything like this. Not that it's good, bad, but it seems very broad. It says serving food. Would that go to a bar, if they served hamburgers or, I'd have to see a lot more on this and how far we're gonna go with it, and if the state's gonna come in and preempt us and put something in on their own, but,
Okay, well, that's
yeah.
Probably the value of sending it to committee, but
Yeah.
Counselor Bona?
If, I would also like to get an opinion if we're referring it just from the Board of Health, get their view on this. It is a health issue, and since they actually approve a lot of things, they have their own set of rules that are not council rules that they have to go in and inspect with the restaurant. So I would just like to hear an opinion from the Board of Health on this also.
Okay, thanks. Further discussion, Counselor Lamb and then Counselor Harpen?
Yes, so just quickly, in response to a couple things that were noted here, this is something that's been adopted by a number of states already in their state legislation. Because of the safety concerns and because of the public health issues that it presents. I should note that this is also for not existing businesses, but businesses that undertake significant renovations and businesses that have not yet to start. So this is not putting a requisite order on existing restaurant owners. It's not requiring every venue in the city to have this. It's very specifically targeted towards those ones that consider themselves to be family friendly. This is the exact language taken from the state. So I will say that for over a year now, the state Senate has actually been looking at this and working through it. And in speaking with the senators, they indicated that it's got positive pull. It's going in this direction. And when we look at things that we've done as a city, whether it's NB 21 or other things where we've addressed it proactively before the state addresses something, I consider this to be a serious health measure. And it is not just a self-serving effort. I would like to be very clear in that. This is something that's been raised to me by a number of families visiting the area, as well as families that live here. And when they go out to dinner or go out to lunch or go to visit people, they want to be able to access safe facilities to change their children.
You included yourself in that when
Counselor.
you were
I
discussing.
did, because it is a direct concern that I too have
Counselors.
experienced.
Yep.
But, I would just like to point out that this is not just self-serving.
Counselor Harpen? You have more to go?
Go ahead.
No,
Sorry,
the last thing I was going to say is when we talk about expense, if you're undertaking a $10,000 renovation of a space, a $150 changing table is not going to break the bank. And there are programs. There's a program right now through, I'm not going to say the business name because I don't think that's correct to do, but there is programs to provide free changing tables to family-friendly venues. This is something where if you look historically at how the inclusion of these in women's rooms changed the ability for women to leave the house before their child was out of diapers, it was a game changer at that point in time for a number of, an entire generation really of people in that respect. In speaking with I did not speak with the Board of Health. I think that's a great point. I did speak to the code enforcement officer, so I spoke with Mr. Moranti. He indicated that there is code that requires a certain height for changing tables, but he was very surprised that this is not already codified into planning board. And that is actually why I suggested this goes to community development, because we are involved with the planning board as a committee. So I can stop there and allow for
Thank you.
others, but that's where I'm at.
Counselor Harpen?
Yeah, I think community development is a good idea, and I like the idea of the Board of Health getting involved as well, because although it does make it convenient, it's also another area that could possibly hold germs as well. So, you know, the Board of Health and inspections on it certainly would be of value as well. So my only questions are, it's public venues that serve food. I mean, so really, I think it's broad as well. Like, does that include Mass Mocha when they're having an event and they're serving food? Does that include sporting events that we have through the school system that serves food? Are parks gonna have to have these changing tables in North Adams? So that would be like the Steeple Cats as well. You know, if there's sporting events up at the high school, you have food that's served there as well. So, I mean, how far does this go?
Right. All good questions. I'm sorry, which was up first?
Whatever.
Counselor Blackman.
Normally, ordinances go before general government, but since lots of things seem to keep coming my way, that's our way. It's fine, particularly with the planning board. I want to say, you know, my kids came with a marriage license, so I didn't have to deal with diapers the first time around. But I do have grandchildren, and my husband and I tend to see them together, and he's more than welcome to take the child and change it. So I have no problem with this. I think it's actually a good idea. Thank you, Councilor Lamb, for bringing it up. My concerns are on the small business side, and obviously, you know, you also deal with that issue. As it's written, it kind of, the second section talks about renovations. The first section kind of leaves it up in the air. I think it's obvious by talking about food choices specifically offered to children, advertising to families, that's pretty clear. Obviously, we don't need one at the State Street Tea. And that's not the goal of it. One of the things would be a time frame. And how are we gonna, I mean, games, they use porta potties. There's not bathrooms. If we're using the public bathrooms at the high school, then maybe, yes, there should be putting changing tables in there if that's the public venue for a basketball game or an indoor game. And yes, it's gonna mean we'd have to put one at the Steeple Cats. And I haven't been in the men's room there, so I couldn't tell you if there's enough room or not. But I do think we need to take care of our families, we need to be attractive to families, and we need to think about public health, and I think you're right, like trying to balance or put a kid on a floor or put the kid on the table. I mean, I've seen it everywhere, and you're like, okay, now what are we supposed to do with that table? So, kudos and good luck.
All right, thank you, Counselor Bona.
Again, it's going to come down to that definition, because you mentioned how, you know, they might not bring the baby into a bar, but babies are allowed in the bar. They're not denied, you know, if someone wants to bring if they're going to a certain place, they can bring them in, and obviously if it needs to be changed, so, and yet they still serve food too. So, you know, that's going to become a case of that gray area of who has it. The other thing is, when you talk about it wouldn't affect unless they make renovations. And there's restaurants that I know of that have made renovations, but they haven't had to upgrade their bathrooms, and their bathrooms are barely enough room to stand in. They weren't even forced to have to make them ADA. So if they're not ADA size, but yet they put $50,000 out into the kitchen, which one sets precedence? You know, does that mean they have to have a changing table over a wheelchair accessibility? So those are just some, because I know some restaurants in town that has happened, and that's a situation. So where does that, you know, what is that renovation number? And is it, if it's bathroom renovations, that's one thing. But even so, you can renovate a bathroom. You can put $10,000 into bathrooms. Doesn't mean they're larger. They just look nicer. So, you know.
Very good.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was focused over here. Who had the hand up
problem.
first? Counselor Wilkinson.
Sometimes there's just too much government. I'm sorry. I can't say anything positive about this, so I'm gonna say nothing at all.
All right,
Thank you.
Counselor Lamb.
You want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So a few things. The first thing is just to note, this is why I want this referred to committee and not voted on tonight, because, again, I pulled language directly from the state. So there's a high probability that this is going to come down to us no matter what. It's been in process for over a year. It's likely that it'll probably come to a head within the next year. Neighboring states have adopted this within the last year, so there's definitely momentum around this. So I'll put that out there just for context purposes. The other piece that I want to say is the reason that I want us to address this is specifically because of language. So in speaking with the Community Development Office, things like the definition of public amenities might be a more appropriate measure for identifying this, because there is actually a definition of what that means. So instead of it requiring all restaurants, all bars, like public amenities that provide direct service for families with children, something along those lines where it gives us a definition. I would agree. Like, I would also not use the word victroller or victualler or however you pronounce that word, but that's literally what was in the state language. This is a case of, old language being continually used in our state level ordinance. That's why I want us to dig into this. I still see it being of importance, and I know there are families that also see this being of importance. If we can provide an opportunity to make North Adams more attractive to people that live here and people that may want to live here and may want to raise children or grandchildren or whoever they're raising here, I think that it is of value for us to address something that we can actually control.
Thanks, Councilor Harpen.
I just want to mention, I am also concerned about the small businesses in the community. And we do have quite a few restaurants in downtown. And normally, restaurants, when they set up their floor plan and you think about it, they're really, the space, they're trying to have as much open space as possible so that they can put tables and chairs and seat people there. So generally, their bathrooms are only as big as they need to be. So when you think about that, most of the restaurants probably just have enough room to open up a stall and open the door going into the bathroom, being able to stand at the sink and not, hit anybody with a changing table coming down. So they probably would have to expand their bathrooms just because it's the type of business that they're in. They generally will not have a restroom that's huge, most restaurants. So I am concerned about that. So I would really like to see if there's any kind of funds out there or grants for these smaller businesses.
We have a motion and a second. Was there a return date on this, Councilor?
I would like this to come back second meeting of April.
Okay, do we have to?
So I will amend.
Can
Yes.
you amend also sending it to the Board of Health?
I think I would want to have the language redone before we send it to the Board of Health. So if we're going to discuss it in committee, I think that it would make more sense for us to send a product that we're actually thinking about versus one that we're just pulling from state language.
Okay. So an amendment to the motion to bring this back on the second meeting in April?
So moved.
Do we have a
Second.
second? All those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
We have a motion and a second to refer this to the Community Development Committee to come back on April 24th. Further discussion?
So to be clear, the committee will work on it. The plan is for them to send something back to council, and then at that point, we'll refer it to the Board of Health?
No, I'm going to try to get it to the Board of Health before it comes back to us.
Okay.
But I want to work on it through the committee to get it to a point where we feel like we're going to refer that to council and then refer it to planning, or not the planning board, the Board of Health,
Okay.
so that it's got their eyes on it before we have any decisions in this room.
Okay.
Councilor Blackmore.
Yeah, this is a quick thing. This would also be a way to encourage businesses to have a family bathroom or a unisex bathroom instead of men's and women's. They can have one bathroom, call it the family bathroom. Anybody can use it, anybody can change their baby.
Last words, Councilor Moulton.
Quick one. Wonder if it'd be worth it to try and get a date specific when this is gonna come up before the state? I mean, if it's gonna be 2 months or a year, or go to the state rep and just ask their state rep, if there's something.
So I did. It's in the Senate now, and they indicated that there's no date determined. So it's not something that we necessarily, and that's why they suggested that I actually move forward with it, because I've been waiting for 7 months to even bring this to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Motion and a second to refer to general government and bring this back on the second meeting in April. All those in favor?
Aye.
No.
Opposed? One opposed. Councilor Wilkinson. Thank you. Paper 11,862, communication from Councilor Bona regarding the North Adams Youth Commission. Councilor Bona.
Yeah, I'm not going to read my paper. I'm just going to say currently we have an ordinance in the books for saying that we are supposed to be having a youth commission. We haven't had a youth commission formed in several years now. And I did suggest possibly sending this back to general government, but another option is we could send it back to the mayor to get his opinion. This is something I have discussed with this mayor a couple years ago. I don't know if everyone saw, they got a letter from former Councilor Merrigan And she also told me that, she discussed this with the mayor over a year ago. And I also has spoke to this previous administration. I think the challenge is it's a little different than a regular commission because you actually need some leaders on it that help form and run it differently because you do have youth on it. So that's been, I think, the challenge is you're almost making an organization versus just a committee of adults. But here's the thing: we have an ordinance that says we're supposed to have it. We're not having it, so something needs to change.
Okay.
Okay. So right now the motion. I would probably make the motion to refer this to the mayor to get an opinion from him of what direction he would like to go with this.
I'll second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion.
And with a return date of,
And I'm sorry, we're going to just roll that into that.
yeah, with a return date of, I don't know, 2 meetings from now.
Okay, so that's okay. Your second?
A
Okay.
second.
Okay.
Return date of the first meeting in April then. Okay. Discussion, Counselor Moulton.
Yeah, I remember when we did that, but was that commission appointed by the mayor?
The commission is appointed by the mayor, and actually, I do apologize if you read my letter. I want to clarify, and Councilor Merrigan did clarify in her letter. I said it was Councilor Merrigan and Councilor Bolin that sort of set charge to this, and it was actually Councilor Caridi and Councilor Bolin. Councilor Merrigan wasn't even a counselor yet, but she was a big part of the development of it, and she was also the first chair of the commission. But I believe it does get appointed, and the council approves the appointments. And they tried to divide it up and have different people from different schools. Half of it was like half adults, half youth, and it was split up with different schools.
Okay, thank you. Other discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Committee reports and minutes. Seeing none, I'm sorry, Counselor Lamb?
I just want to note that there was a rather robust meeting of the Community Development Committee last week. We got a really great presentation by Nat Carnes from Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, specifically on the short-term rentals work. So that is continuing to move forward in terms of the conversation with the city. It's in a very early stage. Nothing has been determined, so this is where they're receiving public feedback and engagement. And so if anyone is interested in that, please stay apprised to when those meetings occur so you can be a part of it.
Thank you. Any other reports? Counselor Harpen?
It's not a report. I just want to mention that the Finance Committee will be convening again regarding the fees. There was some information that we sent back to Mr. Canales to get back to us on stuff. So we'll be meeting on Monday, the 16th, if anybody's interested, at 6:30.
Terrific.
Here in Council
Thank you.
Chambers.
Interesting meetings. All right. We have no licenses before us. Open forum. Anyone wishing to address the council, you have 2 minutes. Please be recognized. Mr. Sapienza.
Yes, Brian Sapienza, 113 Pleasant Street. I just want to give a shout out to Mr. Patrick Hernandez. Family and friends gathered at a house on Saturday night to celebrate. He provided almost 800 hours worth of community service to the Berkshire Food Project. So I just want to give a shout out to Pat Hernandez. He's a valuable asset to our community. He's helped me personally in my previous campaigns, and I just want to say congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the council? Mr. Smith.
I'm Robert Smith. I live at 140 Pleasant Street. In regards to this public amenities ordinance, there's so many things, so many factors that I can think of back and forth. On the one hand, are we going to force restaurants to spend extra money, which they may not be able to afford, to amend their bathroom areas? Are we going to have restaurants which may have male and female bathroom areas supply those amenities in each of those bathrooms? It's a nice idea about the thing with children. I'm all in favor of that. But what if the restaurants can't afford to do this? And Council Lamb is mentioning about restaurants coming into our area. but when's the last time we actually seen a restaurant come into our area? We have several restaurants here that don't have these amenities and probably don't have the room to make amendments. There are restaurants that the bathroom area may be too close to people and sitting down to eat food. And if that odor comes out, that's not going to be a pleasant thing for them to experience. So I think we should wait further on this. There's no guarantee the state is going to approve this in Boston. I think we should wait, and then we should also wait for what Councilor Boner was mentioning about the Board of Health. So I have to see how this is going to go, but there's major concerns here on both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none. The mayor's not able to join us this evening. Liaison updates and councilor concerns. Councilor Lamb.
This is just a quick note in reference to some questions that were raised at the last council meeting around safe crossing curriculum in the schools. I did touch base with the school district, Kim Roberts Morandi, just to hear what necessarily is offered. And every student in the school district does get a curriculum at the beginning of the school year that talks about how to safely cross the road and shows them how to do that. And then there's also walking school buses that occur at a couple of points during the year to actually show students safe routes to school. And it's actually, that is what it's called. So there is an actual curriculum that's provided. I believe she said it was through their gym classes that it's actually provided as a resource so that they are aware of how to cross the street in a safe manner.
Terrific. Councilor Blackmer.
I just want to let people know, the Mass Municipal Association, MMA meetings that have been scheduled for this week have been canceled. That includes the legislative breakfast in Great Barrington, which a lot of people don't, if you signed up for something, you will get an email telling you it's been canceled, but not everybody signs up and they show up, and particularly with the breakfasts, employees from different departments can go. So I just kind of want to put that out there, that those meetings have been canceled for this week.
Thank you. Anything else? Just a personal note, I got to read to Miss Meehan's first grade class at Colgrove Park Elementary School last week, and tonight I arrived here and found about a dozen thank you notes from the kids, which makes this all worthwhile. Thank you. Hearing nothing further, motion is in order to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.